Hey now, and welcome to Cardinals Stand Out in Your Career podcast. This is a podcast presented by our Alumni Relations Office here. I'm Nic Taylor, the Executive Director of Alumni Relations here at Saginaw Valley. And today we're going to be talking all about how to have a tough conversation. Tough conversations like going in, asking for a raise from your boss, or maybe having a conflict with a coworker. I'm really excited today because we have a special guest, good friend of mine, Dr. Eltaro Hooper. Eltaro is the Senior Director and Deputy Title IX Coordinator at Central Michigan University, and also a recent Distinguished Alumni Award winner. So good to have you back.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to be back on campus.
I love it. So today we are going to be talking about having tough conversations. Don't worry, you and I are not going to have a tough conversation today. We're going to have a fun conversation, but we're going to try to help our alumni kind of understand what are some strategies, what's the psychology behind some of these tough conversations. And with your background, obviously Title IX is a difficult topic, right? Across all campuses. With your background, I appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise today.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start. I mentioned your background because we've been catching up, and I'm talking. Give us a little bit about yourself and your background, and how this topic maybe fits in your work today.
Okay, so my background, education-wise and work-wise, I have a couple degrees. Two from SVSU.
I like it.
Bachelor's and undergrad to master's, and then I have a doctorate from Central Michigan University. I started in higher ed in 2009 in student life, working with fraternity and sorority life, working with commuter programs, student led and funded programs to bring about activities for students get engaged with. During my time in student life, I transitioned out of there and went to residential life. Started working in there, also doing student conduct. In my time working student conduct, really developed an understanding for, addressing behavioral needs, addressing personal needs, so students can, not have their lowest moment be their, darkest moment that changes their whole trajectory in their educational career. And so I really gravitated towards what that meant for me and my personal life, and then how I can also impact students going through their own struggles within that higher education setting. From there, I was tapped on the shoulder to do Title IX work. So not only was I serving as a director in residential life in student conduct, I was also doing Title IX work. And so,
can you help us a little bit? You and I, living and breathing higher ed, right? Working higher ed, we understand what Title IX is. But when we say doing Title IX work at the higher education level, what does that mean for our audience?
Right. So Title IX is a federal law that was established in 1920 to address sex discrimination on campuses. It was originally embedded in athletics, and so how to address sex discrimination in athletics. But it broadened its scope with regard to how to address sex discrimination and harassment more broadly to include sexual misconduct. And so when I talk about Title IX, it includes equity standards. It includes sexual misconduct, so addressing sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, sexual harassment, those type of misconducts that would be sexual in nature or sex-specific discrimination.
So when we came to talk to you about tough conversations, I mean, you have probably some of the toughest conversations that are out there. Don't worry, we're not going to get into specifics on those type of tough conversations, but using your background in your Title IX experiences and in what you've learned, I feel like a lot of people struggle with tough conversations. We all do. Guilty as charged here, right? What are some of the ways, some of the struggles that you see folks having in tough conversations, and what are some of the ways in which we're never going to minimize a tough conversation, right? But what are some of the key things you think people need to keep in mind when having a tough conversation?
So it depends. Are you on the receiving end of that tough conversation? Are you delivering that tough conversation?
I love that. Thank you. First of all, I think today our big push here as part of our topic is for our alumni who know that they have to go and have a tough conversation, right? Okay. So kind of stepping across that threshold, going, okay, I'm going to go talk to Nic, and I'm going to go talk to Nic about getting a raise, or I'm going to go talk to my boss about some feedback that I know that they're not going to want to hear, right? Yeah. So in that sense, going and having the conversation.
Yeah. in my experience, delivering a tough conversation, I try to lead with a growth mindset. I try to lead with an opportunity to develop the person in the areas in which, the tough conversation is going to center on, whether it be, their professional growth, whether it be their technical skills, interpersonal skills. I want to lead with a growth mindset, and that helps anchors the conversation for me with the individual. So, it helps me to keep in mind, the words that I would choose to use.
Sure.
Helps me keep in mind the environment that I would like to set, whether it be somewhere neutral outside of my office. It has to do with the lighting. It has to do with what's on the table.
Sure.
So I try to make an opportunity to where if I can put the person in the right mindset and front load the conversation with those type of, what word I want to say?
Kind of the characteristics, the
I was
external
front load the conversation with just setting the tone, setting the scope of the meeting, and then leading into the conversation, so they know that while it may be a tough conversation, it's really to benefit their growth and, like I said, whatever that conversation is centered on.
Big fan of Dr. Dweck and all the growth mindset. We've been talking about that a lot, especially as a parent. I know we're both parents. We were catching up on the kids earlier and seeing that home. I want to take you back to maybe not necessarily your Title IX conversations that you're having, but conversations, you're an administrator. You have a lot of folks that have worked with you. And what are some of the tough conversations that you, without giving specifics, we're not going to use any names here, Nic Taylor. What are some of the tough conversations that you've had with employees or folks that you've worked with, and how did those turn out?
Yeah, regularly it's learning the job. It's learning the job, really focusing a new employee or someone that I'm newly supervising in the areas in which I have seen need some growth. Talking with professionals who have been in the field for a while, who may be, stuck in how they are, doing things, whether it be from a past leader or just practice within the office, is really talking with them to show or to have a conversation around, how can we improve our work together? How can we collaborate around the areas that, I see as opportunities to strengthen, maybe areas that they see as opportunities to strengthen. How can we meet in the middle, or really just give some clear direction on, what that means for the individual and ultimately the success of the department. Some employees, they dig their heels because they are stuck in their ways, and it has been a best practice or a regular practice of theirs. But it doesn't mean that practice or that way holds true today. We're serving a different population of students. Their needs are different. Their experiences are different. Times are changing, especially in the work that I do. There are always new practices and best practices and guidances that's coming down from the experts in our field who do the research, who spend the large amount of hours trying to provide best practices to institutions and people in the field. And so being able to tap into that information and apply it in our daily work as we, again, continue to grow within the semesters and the years, having that conversation and getting people on board with that mentality is where I've seen, tough conversations be tougher than what they need to be.
Sure. And I love, there's two things as you're answering, there's two things that you brought to mind for me. The first being, a tough conversation, there's room for growth for everybody, right? And any time that I, as a manager, director, leader myself, anytime that I've had to have a tough conversation with an employee, I tend to get more out of it than they do sometimes, because I start to hear and see what I think the key that I heard from you there is that it's back and forth. It's a conversation. It isn't okay, Eltaro, this is what we're going to do type conversation. It's, all right, we've got an issue.
Right.
We've got something new. And the second thing, and I guess maybe my question comes from that, difficult conversations are very different than destructive conversations. So maybe from your point of view, I would ask, what would be the difference between those two, and how could we help advise some of our alumni to make it keep it a difficult conversation as opposed to a destructive one?
Yeah. Getting the person on the opposite end of the table across from you to lean into the conversation in a way that they feel that they have some ownership in the direction.
Ownership is huge.
Yeah. That they feel they have some value in the direction or the conversation, but then also clarifying what it means for them, right? We may be talking about a different direction, an initiative, bringing on, whatever that would enhance our operations. What does it mean for them in that moment? It may not mean anything, but to make it clear to them, those different points, it helps. Transparency in the conversation allows the person to lean in more of, how can they contribute, whether it be, again, something that directly impacts them or, directly impacts the office. Getting them to buy in on that is I found to be a sweet spot.
You use the word transparency. I think a misstep that I've had in the past with a tough conversation is not understanding the difference between transparency and vulnerability. And I think there is, depending on the situation, there is an expert in some field, maybe not, but there's an outcome that we need to gain on it. And being transparent about the outcome becomes much more impactful as opposed to someone who's going to just try to be vulnerable and say, okay, we really have to have this tough conversation. Let me hear all of your background first. I found myself trying to be more vulnerable than transparent, and that has led to even more difficult conversations down the past. So, you mentioned in an earlier answer, you talked kind of about the environment. I love the comment about lighting. We were joking about the lighting earlier in here and making sure I didn't look too sweaty today. But beyond environment, what are some of the steps? What are some of the things that we can do as professionals to prepare ourselves to have some of these difficult conversations?
In preparing myself, is really going through, how can I convey the message concisely? How can I convey the message with clarity that will, not get too into the weeds if that's not where I want it to go, but allows enough information for the person to, have some reflection and provide some feedback.
Sure.
When it comes to also preparing myself, like I said, I want to make sure that I do work in some levels of, what it means for the person to have the conversation with them.
Yeah.
It may mean something that, is directly related to them. And so we're in development. It may be something that allows them to see an opportunity for their growth within the office or professionally.
Sure.
So I'm trying to keep that as a factor if it can be one. But then also regulating my emotions around the conversation, because, I want to be a mirror to helping set the environment. And so if I'm regulating my emotions, checking in on the words that I'm using to, keep the conversation going and have an open conversation, then I want to make sure that I'm mindful going into that conversation.
I think that's as soon as you said that, I could think of a difficult conversation that I had professionally where after it was over, I journaling, reflecting on the conversation, like, okay, why did this, trying to analyze it. I'm very analytical. I'm trying to analyze it.
I'm always like, I should have said it. Even as much as I prep, I'm always like, I should have said this. I should have did this differently. Yeah.
And so I remember very specifically writing out that the one thing I was actually proud of myself for is I was able to show the right amount of emotion in it, not too much where I was overly emotional and we weren't going to have a productive conversation, but also not, kind of sit there and take it like, okay, you're saying these pretty awful things to me right now. I'm going to act like it is having no impact on my career or how I'm feeling about it, my situation. And I think pre-thinking, kind of going over, keep, like you said, making yourself present in the time. I think it's a huge piece of advice for a lot of our folks out there, is to kind of say, okay, I'm going to go in and level set. I know this is going to be tough.
Yeah.
It's not going to be ripping the Band-Aid. It's not going to be doing it, but I know this is going to be tough. If I can come in with that mindset, I'm much more present, and I'm going to be much more able to kind of have the right type of emotional response along the way, not Nic Taylor flail around and fly off the handle, but also not being emotionless and saying, thank you, may have another, right?
Well, sometimes, because sometimes, depending on what the conversation is, especially if it's about the person's performance or professionalism or growth, they're, we're humans. And so they're going to have an emotional trigger to things that they may not have been aware of, to things that you're bringing to light. They may think they're performing very well, and come to find out there's this curveball that I'm not. And so, they're going to have an emotional response. And so I find myself, prior to those meetings, really just having a mental sparring session. Like, if I say it this way, what might they say back? And then how am I going to respond verbally and non-verbally to ensure that they're being heard, that, if it's off topic and now we're moving from a professional conversation to an emotional conversation, how do I get them back on topic, while also allowing them to process what they're hearing and how they're, outwardly, responding to that emotionally.
I love it. I want to, backing up a little bit. We talked about, today we're going to be talking about going into a tough conversation, how to have it. I want to give two sides of the coin. One side at a time. Don't worry. I'm not going to go too much. But let's, barring jumping in and doing role play, I don't want to do that. But I want to talk about how someone might get ready to, for example, if I'm a subordinate or an employee and I want to go and ask for a raise. And we know that's a tough conversation. There's always the person that's coming like, hey, I'm worth more. Come on, it's going to happen, right? It doesn't happen that way. We know that, right? So let's start with that. Let's start with a young professional or a newer professional in their career, going to go to a manager. They want to ask for a raise. What's kind of the best way to prepare yourself for that? And what type of examples or data should they be bringing with them in that type of conversation?
So let me start with this, what not to do.
Okay.
So I had this experience, and so I'm going to own it. As a young professional in 2009, when I started in higher ed, I was probably 2 years in, and, in higher ed, you get those annual percentage increases. And I'm like, you know what? I feel like I want more than that annual percentage increase. And so I went in not knowing really how to have that conversation. And I just sat across from my boss and was like, hey, I want more than the annual percentage. I come in every day, I get my work done. I don't have any issues with staff, and, I don't have any, bad reports about my performance. So, can I get more than the percentage? No, that's not how it works. Right.
I had that lesson too, by the way. My example was like, hey, LeBron James gets paid. I'm the LeBron James. That doesn't work either. Just say it.
No. In rightfully so, a person that is trying to reconcile with what their value is in their performance, or for the department or for the organization, may fall short of acknowledging, how to have the conversation that is professional, so that you're essentially padding your success to say, here's what I'm bringing to the table. Here's what I've done, as far as, maybe their role requires them to meet certain metrics and they're exceeding those metrics. Maybe their role requires them to do, a certain level of programming, and their programming has been successful and they're getting a lot of feedback. So how can you talk with your leadership in a way that shows that, I'm coming to you with facts. I'm coming to you with performance metrics. I'm coming to you in an objective way that says, I do and have earned more than this percentage. I want to increase my base salary. But I back up to say, know what you're asking for before you go in and ask it. If it's a percentage increase, then know that. If it's a base in your salary, if it's a base bump in your salary, then know that. And then bring forward the objective data that shows that what you're asking for is commensurate with what your performance has been. I always say I want to leave my supervisor in the position to not easily tell me no. The no might come, and so like I said, the mental preparation to respond to a no, to respond to now is not the time, to respond to thank you for the information, I'm gonna need to take some time to think about it. You also want to have those ways to respond in mind as well. Yeah.
All right, so let's jump on the flip side of this.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're out there, we're a first-time manager, first-time director, we're out there, and you're going to have to deliver some tough feedback. I got to tell you, as a manager, this is my least favorite thing in the world, but expectations are not being met. There are certain, like we say, metrics and things that we know that we need to achieve, and we've got to go in and have that first. And I say first because over time I find that folks, once they have had that tough conversation, it's not going to be a surprise the next time, right? But we're going to go into that. What respectful and even-keeled or effective way can a manager kind of prepare to go in and have that conversation with them? You're the manager.
Okay.
You're coming to give me some constructive criticism, right? There's I'm not living up to some expectations. How should I prepare to walk into that conversation and have that conversation?
Hopefully, as the supervisor, the manager, I would want to be astute to where the performance has gone off course, and in seeing that and acknowledging that, have an opportunity to check in with that employee prior to having that real tough conversation where now we're sitting in a more formal setting and really having a deeper conversation around the work versus tapping in, checking in, water cooler conversations to say, hey, I've noticed this, what's happening. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And so if it comes down to the point of now we really need to have that conversation, if we've scheduled the meeting, I would have already talked with that employee prior to then. And so as a leader, you want to give feedback, positive and constructive feedback, all the way up until, the annual performance review, mid-year check-in. So it's not as hard on the employee and not a curveball to them to say, where is this coming from? Right. I think if you can do that on the front end, it makes the conversation, when you really need to have it, anchored in something that has been already mentally discussed. And so when we get into that conversation and really reiterating past conversations rooted in that particular specific focus of their performance or professionalism. And so now I'm building off of that. I'm reflecting on the things that we've talked about in the past. I'm getting their input on, where they have grown, where they see they maybe still need to improve. And so now I'm still rooted in that we're having a discussion. This discussion is, rooted in a growth mindset. Like I said earlier, it's rooted in how we develop you as an employee, as a staff member, to be as successful as you can be. But then also acknowledging, for them, what are the things that they are seeing that's hindering their success? It may be something that is more specific to them as far as, the learning curve, understanding their role. Maybe certain things are not clear within the office, maybe standard operating procedures or documentation that the person needs a different learning modality to really understand what it means for their role. It also may be something with leadership that they're not getting, that they're not seeing, or there is something that's being modeled in a way that they feel that, well, if the leadership is doing it, I can do it too. So having the opportunity to hear from the staff member helps in that conversation. So the hope is that they don't feel like, now I'm being targeted, right? Why is this happening to me? But we're having a more well-rounded conversation to say, acknowledging the things that need growth, acknowledging the success that they're having, but then also have an opportunity to sit in the seat and hear from them on where they see things could improve.
I feel like I would use the term escalation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you as a manager are feeling like you are having to escalate this tough conversation, so all of a sudden we're having this is going to be really tough. It probably means that as a manager, one of my shortcomings is I haven't been giving you enough feedback along the
Mm-hmm.
way. And I think that's an important distinction when we talk about tough conversations, is that it isn't one and done.
Mm-hmm.
It's a constant form of communication that, yes, there can be some tough ones where we walk into and it is a surprise. Maybe something drastic has happened
Right.
one way or the other. But if we're talking about a feedback loop,
Yeah.
and this is based on, whatever our internal metrics are and whatnot, if this is going to be a surprise to you,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe as a manager, I need to spend more time giving you more,
Yeah.
often smaller feedback along the way,
Yeah.
so that it's not.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that may be a factor. That may be a case. But I would say for the situations that I've been in,
Mhm.
I'm an investigator, and
Yeah.
so I always go with
Different.
objectivity, the facts, and so me being able to bring also the progression of
Sure.
where that person has been, the opportunities that they have been given, whether it be paid training, national
Yeah.
training, free webinars, on the job training, side conversations to really talk about the role. If all of those things are happening along the way, and I'm providing you with regular feedback on the things that are going well, the things that I think that they can improve on, but yet we still get to a conversation that's rooted in their performance.
Yeah.
I don't. There's not much reflection I'm going to have on myself as a manager to say I didn't do this, or maybe I should have did this more often. I'm really going to be directed. I'm really going to be directing that conversation to lay all those things out, and then really focus on what the employee is doing, also trying to do to narrow that learning curve, or to overcome these obstacles that we've already talked about, so they can find their success.
So let me ask this: what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes maybe that leaders make in having a tough conversation? We've talked about our growth mindset and having a common purpose and reaching out. I think it's true. We could just say, the opposite of all those things is the mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But in your experience, being an investigator and seeing, some pretty heady stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but also in your experience as a leader and being directed by others and directing other folks, what are some common mistakes people have when it comes to tough conversations?
From the leadership seat,
Either side, yeah.
So let's talk about the leadership seat first.
All right, I like it.
Is not being willing to hear from their employees with regard to things that may be about their own leadership style or approach. Maybe it may be a lack in really knowing their staff members. I think the old adage is, some people like to receive feedback in public spaces. Some people like to receive feedback privately, whether it be positive or negative or constructive. Knowing the staff member may be feedback in which leaders may not often receive, or maybe even acknowledge, but when it is spoken on, it may not be as well received, so they can then move forward and apply that feedback. And so, leaders not being willing to hear from others, their own areas that could be improved. And, you got to take things as with a grain of salt. You got to receive the information.
You stole the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say, you got to take it with a grain of salt. You got to know.
You got to receive the information and say, does that really apply? Because sometimes people are triggered and they have emotional responses that completely don't apply. But that's not the case for all feedback when it comes to leaders. And so being able to step outside of title, role, authority, power, and say, is there opportunity for me to grow with this feedback? If so, how do I apply it, and with who? If not, how do I still acknowledge that and then curve the perceptions that people may be having? But then, and there are times where leaders also need to stand firm in their leadership style and their leadership approach, because it does drive success. It does drive people to rise to the occasion to be successful in their own right as staff members under their rank. So
I think I think you make a really important distinction there when you use the term heard. Being heard is very, very important. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to agree, but in a tough conversation, understanding, a lot of folks just want to be heard. They want their opinion to be recognized. And yes, in any professional relationship, there is going to be a manager, there is going to be an employee, right? And we have to come to a decision, but ultimately as a manager, it's your responsibility, and you probably report to someone else.
Oh yeah.
All the way up. And so being heard, though, I think takes a lot of the sting out of a tough conversation many times.
Yeah.
We're talking about some of your Title IX experience and your director experience. I want you to put your DEI hat on a little bit here, okay? How can cultural backgrounds, identities, even privilege affect how people handle tough conversations? Have you seen a lot of examples of that in your work over time?
Yeah, I haven't seen it as far as me to a staff member. I've seen it in conversations where individuals, community members are coming to me with concerns that they're having in their work environment, with their supervisors or with their colleagues. And, it's rooted in their lived experience.
Yeah.
And talking through that more, me being in the seat to hear their lived experience, so they can be in a safe space. They can tell their story, tell how their story is, impacting their work environment, their working relationships. It goes a long way with allowing the person to get to a point of where I hope to meet them, is how our identity intersects with our relationships, our working relationships, and how that may be really a non-factor in how things can move forward in a more positive way. We address, in the work that I do, discrimination and harassment.
Yeah.
Based on protected identities. And so we're talking about race, gender, weight, marital status, sex, sexual orientation, all of those things. And when folks are coming to me with concerns that they're having in the community, a lot of that comes to the forefront of what's going on in their situation. And while some of those concerns do connect to their identity, we do see some situations where it's really their lived experience that's impacting how they're responding to conversation or responding to opportunity. That really has nothing to do with the person providing that conversation or having that conversation or given that opportunity, that it would be discriminatory or harassing in nature based on those protected identities. And so allowing a person to have their moment to be cathartic, to have a safe space to really, disclose that information, I have seen that they start to click, like, well, maybe it's not that, and maybe it's these other factors, and those other factors are more rooted in, interpersonal skills, professional relationships, and really just setting boundaries with your colleagues to say, you can't talk to me that way. Right. You can't yell at me in the office. You can't, use foul language with me in the office. And so really setting the tone there when it comes to, navigating a space where, now we have, different generations in the same work environment. We have, people from different backgrounds in the same environment. And so really being able to not only show up as your authentic self, but being in a frame of mind that other people are also going to show up as their authentic self. And so where does the line cross where something becomes someone is showing up as who they are versus someone is showing up and being unprofessional and not showing civility within the workplace?
The overarching theme, I think, that I take from hearing you talk about these tough conversations is whether you're the initiator of the conversation or the receiver of that conversation, you have to be able to walk in and listen
Mm-hmm.
and hear, use that term here, and regardless of any of the cultural background that you might be bringing to that conversation, you have to be willing to open up and hear the other side of any difficult conversation. And I think, the whole adage, and I grew up, my dad, he'd love it if he was listening, and I'd be quoting him already. You got 2 ears in one mouth, right? You got to listen twice as much as you talk. And I think the key to all of our difficult conversations and where we go wrong many times is we come in with a very specific agenda. Not that that's wrong. We should have some agenda in it, but we come in with that agenda and we forget that we also need to hear. We know it's going to be difficult because there's going to be a conflicting viewpoint. And so we have to be able to accept that.
Yeah. It's okay to be in the learner seat.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, status wise, title wise, experience wise, it's okay to be in the learner seat. It's okay while you're sitting in the learner seat to be uncomfortable with what people are saying, with what people have experienced, because then you allow yourself to more understand that person, understand what brings them to the environment, how they show up. But you don't have to own it. It's not your experience to own. It's not your reactions, or I'm gonna say emotions, to take on to yourself. Allow that person to just be that person and talk from their lived experience. And so when that conversation is done, you walk away with a better understanding of who that person is, not their story, not owning their emotions, but maybe the next time you interact with them, you have a different approach on how to engage them, that, as we all would like to do, be collegial, be partners, be collaborators, and show civility when we're all trying to do this work. We work in a higher ed setting. And so the better we can have a working relationship, the better our community is going to be, right?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time. We're getting towards the end, and we always finish with kind of this overarching question, and I think there's a lot that we could pick and choose from here. So I'm going to ask for your opinion first. But if you were to, I want you to picture the young alum out there in the workforce, right? Who knows whether it's them going to talk to a superior or them having a conversation with a coworker, but know that it's a tough conversation. What would be the one big piece of advice that you would want to tell that person before they walk into that conversation?
Oh,
nice. See, I told you it's a tough one.
Oh, all right. Oh, man.
Don't worry. We just put it in headlines, and that's all. No, I'm just teasing.
Yeah. Mental fortitude around the conversation resulting in it being able to defeat you, deter you, or develop you. Right. I think that's key. I learned that early on in my young professional career was, walking away from a tough conversation. I'm going to have emotions about it, right? I'm human. I'm like, man, I don't feel like I want to do this anymore. I'm going to find something else. I'm only going to give the bare minimum now. And those are just natural emotions that I know I've walked away with. But ultimately, I've got to a stage where, I'm going to let that tough conversation develop me. I'm going to, acknowledge the areas where I do see there being some growth, needed growth. And then the areas that maybe not so much, I'll let them fall to the wayside while I focus on the things I need to handle right away. But having a mental fortitude and approach to say, is this conversation going to defeat me, deter me, or develop me? And hopefully it moves them to development. Because ultimately, if they can have more of an optimistic mind set around a tough conversation, an individual can find the sweet spot in which they acknowledge they're getting some help. They may not see it. They may not want to acknowledge it in the moment, but it's opportunity for them to grow as a young professional.
That's why we have you here, man. That was perfect. That was right. As soon as you said you used those three terms, I'm like, yep. I think that's the lesson in all of this, is that every I can't say it any better than you did, so I'm not going to try. But I see every tough conversation as a way to get better long term, whether it was directed towards you or you had to direct it towards someone else. It's a way for us to improve overall. Well, Dr. Hooper, it's been awesome to have you here.
Yeah,
I appreciate
you.
your time. It's always awesome to see you here on campus. Thank you so much for sharing in this conversation. Hopefully this wasn't too tough of a conversation. I thought this was fun.
This was good for Wednesday.
Thanks for making a thanks for making a difficult topic easier to digest and understand. I really appreciate that about what you had to share today. And I think that's going to be super helpful for a lot of our alumni out there.
I hope so.
Speaking of alumni out there, for all of you, appreciate your time listening in today. Don't forget, you can always catch up on what's happening with the Alumni Relations Office at svsu.edu/alumni. Also, on a side note, in revolving around our Cardinals Stand Out in Your Career podcast, if you have future topics that you're passionate about or you may want to speak about, maybe you're an expert in a field, or you just have a topic and you'd like more information, you'd like us to do the research, please send us an email at alumni@svsu.edu and use the subject line Stand Out in Your Career podcast. And we would love to hear some of those ideas and maybe come up with some future examples that are important to you. As always, it's a great day to be a Cardinal. We appreciate all the ways in which our alumni stand out, not only in their career, but in their community. And we can't wait to see you here on campus soon. Thank you so much. And cut.